Hey everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're exploring a figure most of us only know from childhood, Dr. Seuss.
That's right, but this time, we're going beyond those beloved children's books.
Yeah, we're going to take a closer look at the man behind those whimsical rhymes, Theodor Seuss Geisel.
And let me tell you, his life was almost as fantastical as the stories he created.
Now we're basing this deep dive on a YouTube video by Faxinate.
It's called Dr. Seuss Paid for His Darkest Secret.
Interesting title.
Yeah, and it really gets into some of the lesser-known aspects of Dr. Seuss's life.
Like, did you know that his first wife, Helen, tragically took her own life?
And get this, her suicide note hinted at a scandal that Dr. Seuss was desperate to keep hidden.
Wow, okay, so there's definitely more to this story than meets the eye.
Way more.
Well, let's start at the beginning.
All right, so picture this. It's the early 1900s.
Okay.
And Theodor Seuss Geisel is born into a pretty well-off family in Springfield, Massachusetts.
Springfield, Massachusetts.
Yep, and his family actually owned a brewery.
A brewery. Wow, that's a far cry from the worlds he created in his books.
Right, but you know, that brewery would play a significant role in his life.
How so?
Well, for one thing, Prohibition hit the family business hard.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then there was World War I.
Oh, right, I bet that brought a whole new set of challenges.
Exactly. Anti-German sentiment was running high at the time, and, well, Geisel was a German name.
Yeah, I can only imagine how that impacted him and his family.
It definitely shaped his worldview.
Okay, so we've got a young Theodore growing up amidst some pretty significant historical events.
Right, and it's during this time that his rebellious streak starts to emerge.
Rebellious streak, huh?
Oh,
That's not something you usually associate with Dr. Seuss.
I know, right? But trust me, it's there.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So he goes off to Dartmouth College, and there he really dives headfirst into his passion for writing and humor.
I can see him fitting right in at a college humor magazine.
Oh, he did more than just fit in. He became a major player in the Dartmouth humor magazine, The Jack-O-Lantern.
The Jack-O-Lantern. What a great name.
Right, and he eventually worked his way up to editor-in-chief.
So this is where the Seuss part of his name comes in, right?
You got it. He got into a bit of trouble at Dartmouth.
Oh, what kind of trouble?
Well, you see, it was during Prohibition, and young Theodore was caught hosting a party with some illegal beverages.
A bit ironic, considering his family's brewery background.
Right. Anyway, he almost got expelled.
Wow, that's a close call.
It was, but the dean made a deal with him.
A deal?
Yeah, he could stay at Dartmouth, but he had to resign from all extracurricular activities, including, you guessed it, the humor magazine.
Oh, no. That must have been devastating for him.
It was, but Theodore, being the clever guy he was, found a workaround.
I bet he did. What did he do?
He started writing for the magazine under a pseudonym, Seuss.
That's brilliant. So even back then, he was finding ways to bend the rules and express himself.
Exactly. And little did he know that pseudonym would one day become a global phenomenon.
It's amazing how these early experiences shaped him.
It really is.
So after Dartmouth, he sets his sights on Oxford, pursuing a PhD in English.
Yeah, he wanted to be a professor.
But fate had other plans, didn't it?
It did indeed, and that's where Helen Palmer enters the picture.
The woman who would become his wife.
The one and only.
So tell me about Helen. What was she like?
Well, from what we know, she was an incredibly insightful and supportive woman.
In what way?
She saw something truly special in Theodore's writing and illustration.
Oh, she recognized his talent even before he did, maybe?
That's quite possible, and she encouraged him to pursue a career in art instead of academia.
Wow, she really believed in him.
She did wholeheartedly.
And thankfully, he listened to her.
Otherwise, we might not have Dr. Seuss as we know him.
It's amazing how one person's belief can change the course of history.
It really is.
So they met at Oxford, fell in love, and got married in 1927.
That's right, a whirlwind romance.
And with Helen's support, Theodore's career as an artist began to take shape.
It did, but as you'll see, his path to success was anything but straightforward.
Oh, I'm sure there were plenty of twists and turns along the way.
You could say that again. His big break actually came from a rather unexpected source.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What was it?
Bug spray ads.
Wait, bug spray ads. Seriously?
Seriously, in the 1930s, he started working for a company called Flit.
Flit?
Yeah, they made insecticides.
Oh, not exactly the whimsical world of children's literature.
Not exactly, but his work for Flit was a huge success.
Really? How so?
Well, he had this knack for creating these catchy slogans and these really memorable illustrations.
Like what?
Well, his most famous slogan for Flit was, "Quick, Henry the Flit."
quick, Henry, the flit. I can almost hear it in his voice.
Right. Those ads were everywhere.
And they really put him on the map as an artist.
They did. It's funny how sometimes success comes from the most unexpected places.
It really is. So while he's making a name for himself with bug spray, is he also working on any books at this point?
He is, but his first two books, Boners and More Boners, were collections of humorous anecdotes, not exactly the children's books he'd become known for.
Boners. Okay, that title definitely wouldn't fly today.
Different times, different humor.
Makes sense. So what about his first real children's book?
Well, that would be his third book, and it was a bit of a passion project for him.
What was it about?
Strange and fantastical animals. It was actually inspired by a trip he took with Helen.
Oh, I love that. A husband and wife creative collaboration.
It's a great story, but unfortunately, this book faced a ton of rejections before it was finally published.
Oh, no, really? Even Dr. Seuss got rejected?
Even Dr. Seuss. But eventually, it found a home and was published as To Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street.
To Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, such a classic title.
And you know, it really marked a turning point in his career.
How so?
Well, it was his first foray into the world of children's literature.
And it wouldn't be his last, but just as he's starting to find his footing in this new genre, World War II erupts.
And this event would have a profound impact on Dr. Seuss, both personally and professionally.
Okay, well, we're going to have to dive into that in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so World War II, a pretty major turning point in history for everyone, really.
Absolutely, and for Dr. Seuss, it meant putting his children's book writing on hold for a bit.
To focus on the war effort.
Exactly. He
Okay.
became very politically active during this time.
Interesting. I didn't realize he was so involved in politics.
Oh yeah, he created over 400 political cartoons during the war.
400. Wow, that's a lot. What were they about?
Well, he was a staunch opponent of fascism and the Nazi regime.
That makes sense considering his own German heritage and what was happening in Germany at the time.
Right, and he used his cartoons to criticize Hitler, Mussolini, and the Axis powers.
So a very different tone from his children's books.
Oh, absolutely. These cartoons were sharp, satirical, and sometimes even biting.
I bet. And he wasn't afraid to take on controversial topics.
Not at all. He also used his cartoons to criticize American isolationism.
Isolationism.
Yeah, there was a strong sentiment in the US at the time to stay out of the war in Europe.
And Dr. Seuss was against that.
He believed that the US had a moral obligation to intervene and fight against tyranny.
Wow, so he was really putting himself out there with these cartoons, taking a strong stance on some pretty divisive issues.
He was, and you know, looking back at those cartoons today, it's clear that some of them reflect the prejudices of the time,
Oh, how so?
with some of his depictions of Japanese people, in particular, are problematic, to say the least.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
It is, but it's also a reminder that even beloved figures like Dr. Seuss were products of their time.
A good point. It's important to acknowledge those flaws and learn from them.
Absolutely. And you know, beyond the cartoons, Dr. Seuss was also directly involved in the war effort.
In what way?
He joined the army and became the commander of the animation department.
The animation department, what did he do there?
He made training films and propaganda films for the troops.
Interesting. So he was using his artistic skills to support the war effort.
Exactly, and his work was actually quite well received.
Didn't he win an award for one of his films?
He did. He won the Legion of Merit for his contributions to the war effort.
That's impressive. And wasn't there a documentary he worked on as well?
Yes, it was called Design for Death, and it explored Japanese culture and the reasons behind Japan's involvement in the war.
That sounds fascinating.
It was, and it actually won an Academy Award.
An Oscar. Wow. Dr. Seuss, the Oscar-winning filmmaker.
Who would have thought, right? So as you can see, his wartime experiences were quite varied and had a significant impact on him.
It sounds like, so after the war, he returned to writing children's books, right?
He did, and this is when some of his most iconic works were published.
Like The Cat in the Hat.
The Cat in the Hat, Horton Hears a Who, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, those were all published in the post-war years.
The golden age of Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
What do you think sparked this creative burst?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with his wartime experiences.
So?
I think the war really made him appreciate the importance of peace, tolerance, and standing up for what's right.
Yeah, those themes are definitely present in a lot of his books.
Right, and I think he also wanted to create something joyful and hopeful for children, especially after all the darkness and destruction of the war.
That's a beautiful sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, his personal life was still marked by tragedy, with Helen's passing in 1967.
Right, and as we mentioned earlier, her suicide note hinted at a scandal that Dr. Seuss was trying to keep hidden.
And that scandal involved another woman, Audrey Diamond.
Yes, Audrey was a friend of the couple, and, well, Dr. Seuss was having an affair with her while he was still married to Helen.
Oof, that's got to be tough to process.
It is, and, the timing of his remarriage to Audrey just 8 months after Helen's death raised a lot of eyebrows.
Yeah, I can see why people would be concerned about that.
And it definitely adds a layer of complexity to his legacy.
It does so. With all this turmoil in his personal life, how did Dr. Seuss navigate the later years of his career and his life in general? It's hard to imagine, going through something that painful and still creating such joyful work.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the power of creativity as an outlet, maybe even a coping mechanism.
Right. And I wonder, did any of those personal struggles seep into his stories?
I think it's definitely possible, even in some of his most lighthearted books, there are these subtle hints of melancholy.
Like, for example?
Well, take Horton Hears a Who. On the surface, it's a fun story about an elephant who hears tiny voices on a speck of dust.
Yeah, I loved that one as a kid.
But when you look closer, it's also about feeling isolated, about being the only one who believes in something.
You're right, there's a kind of sadness to Horton's determination, like he's carrying a heavy burden.
Exactly. And that theme of feeling alone, of not being heard or understood, that resonates with Dr. Seuss's own experiences, doesn't it?
It really does so, despite the personal turmoil. He kept writing, kept creating these beloved stories.
He did, and he continued to achieve success even as his health declined in his later years.
He was diagnosed with cancer, right?
Yeah, and he passed away in 1991.
It's always sad to lose someone who brought so much joy to the world.
It is, but his legacy lives on through those timeless stories that continue to inspire and delight children and adults alike.
Exactly, and I think this deep dive has really shown us that there's more to Dr. Seuss than meets the eye.
Absolutely. He was a complex individual, capable of both great creativity and, some questionable choices.
It's a good reminder that our heroes, even the ones who seem larger than life, are still human, with all their flaws and contradictions.
So the next time you pick up a Dr. Seuss book, you might see it in a new light.
You'll still appreciate the whimsical rhymes and the fantastical creatures, but you'll also remember the complicated life of the man who created them.
And that deeper understanding, I think, can only enrich our appreciation for his work.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the world of Dr. Seuss.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, if you want to learn more about this fascinating figure, check out that Fascinate video on YouTube.
Yeah, it's called Dr. Seuss Paid for His Darkest Secret.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those imaginations running wild.